Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome fellow Global Council members and fellow IFAW board members to a very exciting 1-hour event here with Azzedine Downs and Vivek Menon, who is the chairman and CEO of Wildlife Trust of India that we have had a partnership with for more than 20 years, and it's going to be a very interesting presentation. I just wanted to welcome you all and just reiterate that the Global Council, the IFAW Global Council, is a group of 43 dedicated philanthropists to wildlife conservation and animal welfare. And we have, this Global Council was founded in 2021, and we are now up to 43 members and growing. We are international, truly. We have US, UK, Europe, Australia so far represented. And we are always looking to add new members. But I think it's a terrific and dynamic group, and I'm really, really thrilled about having you all join us today. So our host and navigator for today is Meredith Whitney, who is our program manager for wildlife rescue. And so with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to her to help us through this this great presentation. So welcome everybody, and I look forward to it.
Thank you very much, Mark. Welcome everyone. I cannot be more pleased that you will get a chance today to learn more about IFAW's long-term trusted partner, Wildlife Trust of India, and our accomplishments and challenges that we faced over the last 20 years. I want to welcome Vivek Menon, founder, trustee, and executive director of Wildlife Trust of India, and Azzedine Downs, president and CEO of IFAW. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We'd like to encourage everyone to keep their cameras on. I think almost everyone has them on at this point, which is great. It's lovely to see your faces. We would like to keep this as a discussion. So if you have questions or comments, please feel free to use the hand raise feature. We welcome those questions. If you prefer, you can put them in the chat box and we will read them for you. If you could also, though, remember after you speak to just mute yourself when you're not speaking. There will be a short time for Q&A at the end of the presentation as well. But if you have clarifying questions you'd like to ask during the presentations, please feel free. And this session will be recorded. So the long-term partnership between WTI and IFAW is a fantastic example of our joint commitment to provide real, lasting solutions to some of today's most difficult problems. As populations increase worldwide and place increasing pressure on wildlife and wild places, IFAW and WTI are working together to rescue, rehabilitate, and release wildlife into secure, protected spaces where they can thrive in the wild. And to tell us more about that, I'd like to welcome again Azzedine and Vivek. I thought you all might like to start off maybe by sharing the origin story of how and why this partnership came about.
Yeah, you go first. Well, we have known one another now for almost 22 years. And we met in conferences. We had a millennial conference that was sponsored by IFAW. And we had a number of scientists from around the world, and we had Vivek there. And then we had another scientist who said they would only come to a meeting, a millennial meeting, if it was held once every millennium. But Vivek has always been an engaging partner and friend, and also CITES, and we can talk about that as we go through. And as Meredith said, you know, it's a conversation and questions come up. But Vivek and I met, and I think immediately sort of connected on the issues that face us at IFAW, working across so many different cultures. And so everyone comes to a meeting like that with biases, and to break through, to find solutions. It's not just about the science, it's about the cultural adaptation. And so I think that's why we connected.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I had been doing these treaties, including CITES, as Dean said, for many, many years, a dozen years before we met. And during my time at the treaties, I was often an advisor to the Indian government, so on the Indian delegation, not on the NGO platform, but on the government platform. And I first met IFAW really as people who chased me for a vote. And they were relentless about it, and about trying to ask India to vote for elephants and whales, which was a no-brainer anyway. We would vote as a country anyway for these animals. But that's how I got introduced to IFAW, and I was intrigued. I wanted to know more. And then, like Azzedine said, I was invited to give a talk at the Millennial Conference in Cape Cod, which I came and did. And immediately it struck me that there are so many similarities between IFAW and the Wildlife Trust of India that I founded. In particular, although I'm a traditional wildlife conservationist who has gone through the WWF IUCN mold all through my early years of conservation, being an Indian, and that is really the cultural part of it, the individual life always mattered, whether or not the population did, or whether or not the habitat did, both of which mattered in the left side of my brain, the right side of my brain. I knew that the individual mattered as well. So when I came and saw that IFAW had this agenda, I thought it matched perfectly. It was not enunciated in those words in those days. Now we phrase it better. But really the founding principles of both organizations had these elements. And very soon we found that there were enough commonalities for us to not recreate things, but work in tandem. So that is origin.
Thank you both. So once you found these commonalities and these shared goals, can you tell us a little bit about how that translated into some success stories for you both?
Yeah, I'll just say, putting two things together, so at IFAW, we look at the individual animals and then conservation. So putting those two things together, and we talk about pillars, but it's just how we organize ourselves. So we're always looking for examples where we could save an individual life, we could rescue, we could rehabilitate, and then we could release, but into an environment, into a healthy biosphere. And so the notion of putting those two things together, I think very early days, we found that we could do that in India. Actually, I would say before we were able to do it in other places, because it sounds to all of you who support us, it sounds like common sense, but it was groundbreaking, I'd say. So, I'll let Vivek talk about the rescue center and some of the individual animals that we've saved, but why it's important, even culturally.
Yeah. Well, culturally, I told you that life matters in India. I mean, our law in India does not allow anybody to kill any wild animal, right, for any purpose, unless it is defending your life. Otherwise, it's all banned. Not from now, from ages ago. And it started with Ashoka 2,500 years ago. For those of you in the Global Council who think Yellowstone is the first park in the world, or the British had the first animal welfare law, then 2,500 years ago, India had animal edicts, not written in English, but and not written on paper, but on rock formation. And if you wish to come to India, I can show you some outside my home. Which talked about what animals had to be protected and what needed to be done. So the ethical framework was there. But many years ago, I had gone to Africa as an advisor to the Kenya Wildlife Service, long before IFAW started working in the region even. And I bumped into Daphne Sheldrick, who used to run this, she doesn't run it, her family still runs the orphanage there. And I saw how elephants were being put back. And a lot of my work scientifically has been on elephants. I came back to India and found this scenario of elephant calves getting orphaned in the floods at Kaziranga. And it was an annual phenomenon where rhinos, elephants, deer, etc. used to come out and get orphaned, and they all went into a zoo. And I asked the park managers there, why can't we put them back? Because this is a life saved is good. Putting it back into captivity is half the rescue. You know, you're not completed the rescue. Why do we put it back? So deer and other things, I have no problem. But elephants, they repeatedly told me an elephant will not go back. An elephant will not go back once touched by human beings, because this is what 5,000 years of civilization tells us. So while ethics is important in India, 5,000 years of civilization is also a millstone sometimes, yeah, because that's what you're taught, that's what you think. But then I said, I've seen this in Africa, and if the African elephant can recognize another elephant after being brought up and differentiated to a human handler, why can't an Asian elephant? So it took us a lot of time to convince the government, which I use my scientific credentials to do that. But then we needed the money and the international backing to get this done. So this partnership came at exactly the right moment. And we could launch what is today called the Center for Wildlife Rehabilitation and Conservation that has finished 22 years of putting animals back. So Meredith, you asked me about a success story, and I think that this is one of the finest success stories, because 22 years, we have now put 3 or 4 generations of elephants back. The ones that we brought up as youngsters are now grandparents in the wild, proving to the conservation fraternity that that the individual life that we like saving is not only bunny hugging, it's not just soft emotional fluff, but it actually can play a major role in conservation as well. And wearing my hat as IUCN, chair of the Elephant Specialist Group and of the Conservation Translocation Specialist Group that I'm chairing a subcommittee to write guidelines of how these animals are used. So we can now show scientifically that this works. And it's in that putting back that we actually recreated a park, which was 500 square kilometers gone, finished in civil uprising called Manas. And by bringing the elephants and rhinos back, we brought back a landscape to 1,500 square kilometers, triple the size of a World Heritage Park. Again, a great success story. So both these, I think, are the precursors of what IFAW today calls the rescue program and the landscape program. Both were there in that initial stage.
Excuse me. On Manas is a great example too, I think, of a success story beyond numbers. And this is where the partnership has been so important, is I think that historically conservation has had this notion that it was about the numbers. It was about the numbers of animals. And a rhino, for example, and Vivek can tell you more about that story, is they look at it as like a blank slate. Here's a rhino, you save it, you make sure it's healthy, then you put it back in the park. And that's all there is to it. But what we've learned working together is that these individuals have personalities, they have culture themselves, they interact with family members. And this notion of you can't just lift up an animal and stick it in Manas and then it runs away. Our success has been make sure that the animal knows where it's going, how it's interacting. There's a boma, it feels safe. And so it's been a journey, I would say, to convince biologists, and the biology of conservation was so focused on a population, but nothing about the dynamic of the population. Right?
Yeah, and also the politics of it. So conservation, I've often said, although I'm a person who's schooled in science, I've often said it's the art of the possible, not the science of the impossible. You use science as a tool when you need it, but it's an art, really. And in doing this, in putting animals back and bringing back landscapes, we are actually showing politicians, bureaucrats, that this thing works, and they can see it in elephants. And if you describe in an abstract landscape form, only the theoretician or the academic gets it. The politician doesn't, but they can see baby elephants coming back. They can see the joy it brings to other elephants. They can see the joy it brings to their communities. They can see the problems it brings too. So you have to address that as well. But it's real, it's tangible.
You both touched a little bit on Manas National Park, and I'm wondering if maybe Vivek or Azzedine, you can talk a little bit more about why that particular park was chosen, where the animals come from, that have been reintroduced to that park and what the current state is there?
Sure. So these two parks we have been referring to, where the centers in Kaziranga and Manas are two of the 4 or 5 World Heritage sites in India, natural World Heritage sites. And Manas in the late 1980s had an uprising, a civil uprising of people who wanted an autonomous state carved out of the state of Assam. And that turned militant. And as a result, the Indian army was sent to flush them out of Manas, which was their forest. So they hid in it. And there was intense fighting. In that, while they were hiding from the Indian army, they killed all the animals. They ate them, right? They killed all the rhinos to fund their movement by selling their horns. So it was a terrible situation. And in late 80s, 89, 90, I was one of the first biologists who went back to Manas, cutting through elephant grass taller than me to try and find out what was happening inside. And the UNESCO had put it in the world list, the World Heritage list in danger, which is a red list, okay, that this was in danger. So it was an ideal park when the peace accord was signed in the early 90s to they got autonomy, that movement got autonomy. They didn't get a state, but they got autonomy. And the new leaders were looking for ways of atoning for destroying their own forest. They were forest dwellers. And so I had taken one of these young politicians out on safari and shown him wildlife elsewhere. And he said, you know, I really want to bring this back to my state. So when the rescue center idea came up from Kaziranga, which is a rescue center, which is a heritage site, which is got plenty. The problems are of plenty. 85% of the rhino in the world of one-horned rhino is in that one park. So it's got plenty of stuff. So we decided to move that surplus that come out, which are orphaned, etc., and repopulate Manas. So you are saving that individual life, but you're also bringing back a World Heritage Site in danger. And over the years, as I said, not only did these moves of various species of animals, we have moved rhinoceros, bear, tiger in some instances, elephants quite a lot, swamp deer, which was a very endangered deer of that area, clouded leopards, and stuff like that. So by doing all this, we not only brought back Manas in one way, and the UNESCO actually took it off the red list after 20 years, you know, of trying. And it was a huge successful moment in Paris. We got a global standing ovation for being one of the few UNESCO World Heritage Sites that went into danger and came out. It's easy to slip into danger. It's very difficult to bring it out, right? So I think it's also served as a political model, as I said, of conservation. That the fact that you could set aside land for conservation in a country with 1 billion people, with 1/3 of the world's poor. These are not factors you can set aside in India, but still you can set aside land for conservation and make a success.
Thank you. So coming up next, we have a short video that we'd like to share with you that highlights some of the more than 7,000 animals, individual animals that IFAW and WTI have rescued together. And of those animals, more than 60% have been released to the wild, which is a really, truly astounding number. I love that video.
Very nice.
It's
real-
great. You know, I just
beauty.
saying that the interesting thing about Manas too is with the border of Bhutan,
Yeah.
right? And so it provides examples that go beyond borders, literal borders of a country, into a country like Bhutan, which is an extraordinary place also. But providing examples of success breeds success, and so we've had incredible discussions with the government of Bhutan and asking. I remember them saying, "Well, can't you give us some of those rhinos?" And of course, it's the Himalayas. It's very mountainous. And Vivek was saying, "Well, we could, but they'd probably run back down the hill into India." So there's all sorts of interesting stories about what the animal will do. Also, it's you can't just put a plan in place and say this is what's going to happen, because they have minds of their own too. So and depending maybe on what their experience was and where they feel safe and where they feel protected, and depending on the species, extraordinarily intelligent to know what they can express to the people who actually help them.
So we IFAW and WTI have been in partnership for 20 years now, and every long relationship, as we know, has its ups and downs. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to some of the challenges that you've overcome in the last 20 years.
Just from an organizational point of view, we work all around the world, and we have board members here with us, so they know that when we look at how we're going to work in a country, and some of it's historical, whether or not we were giving grants to organizations, or whether we register in a country and work, or we have partners, and the legal frameworks and administration and the bureaucrats want to define what a partnership is in a very different way than I think how we see it. And so there were lots of struggles, even in terms of should we register ourselves in India? Why not IFAW India? And we really hit on this notion that it's IFAW in India, and Vivek leads that. Why would we go through the mechanization of registering and setting everything up when we have this extraordinary organization to partner? And the last thing I'll say, and Vivek jump in, is the world is becoming more difficult for so many reasons. And I think that NGOs fall under the umbrella of politicians and bureaucrats who make it much more difficult to transfer funds, and maybe some of it was about terrorism or money laundering or things like that, or data privacy, or how we share information. So those are all things that sort of the framework of a partnership. But I would say the world is becoming an increasingly difficult place for all of those reasons. And they're not, those regulations are not designed to thwart the good work that we do. But I would say that we suffer from regulations that are designed to stop nefarious actions of the private sector and others.
Yeah, okay, I'd like to take this in two parts, and one responding to what Azzedine has just talked about, and another challenge perhaps. So in terms of the partnership versus IFAW being interested entity, etc. I've been a serial entrepreneur myself, and I founded 5 organizations. Wildlife Trust of India was the 5th that I founded. And so I don't look upon it as a challenge. It's a great learning curve of organizational dynamics for me. I believed right in the beginning, as I do today, that conservation or animal welfare is not a McDonald's chain, right? So you cannot look at it in that framework as some Western lawyers might. or perhaps all lawyers might. It is a dynamic process where you have to look at how you can be most effective. In a country like India, where the challenges of culturally assimilating are just as much as the legal and monetary challenges and governmental controls, for IFAW to have an organization which, if you can walk into any corridor of power in India and say WTI, they recognize you have a brand already. To try and recreate it, it doesn't make any sense to me. But I've never, said that in a board sense or in anything else. I mean, I know boards have had many subcommittees look into it, and you're welcome. You will think it's, it's a governance responsibility of a board to do so, and you should, and you will find that it's absolute waste of time. But you should do it because it's a responsibility to do so. Just now, over the last few months, the Indian government has thrown out 6,000 organizations. Only 400 have got registrations. We are one of them, right? 6,000, including Greenpeace, including many others who are Oxfam, Aga Khan Foundation, you name it. They're all just, one of the whimsies is that you are international and you're not national. So you got a national name and you're doing the same work that you wanted to do and getting as much branding. In fact, as I keep saying, in a branding sense, I've shown IFAW over these 20 years, several projects, and I'll name one, the whale shark campaign, which has been completely branded as IFAW without IFAW putting a single dollar into it. I've raised the money from within India. So
perfect.
We have used this as a true partnership, really. And I think that's one of the reasons of success is that I've not looked upon this as a grantee-grantee relationship, despite several lawyers saying to the contrary. I've looked upon this as an ability to bring the two organizations' strengths together and deliver conservation and animal welfare results, impacts, for which you need people who trust each other. And I've been very fortunate for 22 years to have had this relationship with Azzedine personally, in which we trust each other. So if Azzedine says something, I'm not thinking that he's saying this because he wants IFAW to be this, or if I say something, he's not thinking that he's trying to drive a WTI agenda, but we're trying to drive a common agenda. We strongly believe in that and each other in that. But the other thing I want to say is that conservation or even animal welfare, which means changing people's mindsets or behaviors in any of these things, is not an easy task, and it's definitely not something where you have 2-year frames and 3-year frames, etc. The fact that this is successful is that we've had a 22-year frame so far, and may that continue long, hopefully beyond both of us individually as well. So when you look at it in a long-term frame, you are successful in these things. So the challenge is having box thinkers in between, who try to run little project plans and try to have one-year impacts and 2-year impacts because my board wants it or your board wants it or the donor wants it or whatever. Sure, you have to give every donor and every board member or whoever asks for it the impact for that dollar or that donation. Yeah. But you must also, as a partnership, look beyond that into what our long-term impacts are. Had we looked at saving that individual elephant or rhino in Kaziranga and somebody gave money for that, and we just reported on the milk powder consumed and the life of that animal saved, we would never have got a World Heritage Site out of danger. And as he says, tomorrow creating possibly a peace park between India and Bhutan. I don't want to go beyond myself, but that's what my next aim is, and it will happen if we are there long term into Manas. So the challenges is to balance that need for immediate ROI to a conservation ROI or a welfare ROI, which really has to be a little longer.
Yeah, think about the lifespan of an elephant. And if there's a project or, as donors and you're thinking, well, I want to see an impact, the lifespan of an elephant is going to, one born today is going to outlive me and Vivek.
24 years, one generation, not lifespan, generation. Yeah. So if you want to even show that the next generation is having an effect, it's 24 years. Yeah. The 3-year plans reach that.
So it's perseverance, I would say too, in a partnership, it's perseverance and a commitment. And it can be frightening, I think, from from an organizational perspective, saying, well, will we have the funds? Will we speak with one voice? The board members. I mean, one of the things we always think about, and one of the greatest strengths that IFAW has, is that all around the world where we're registered, where we are present, we speak with one voice. We have one board that speaks with one voice. To lose that is something that I always guard against, and that's to the issue of trust. And we even talked at one point about, well, could we have exchanges with board members and things like that, because it's a commitment that lives beyond individual people and leaders. So those are the challenges, and what I always try to do for everything is to translate when we get into discussions about challenges and why don't we do this, why do we do that. The one question that I ask is whatever you're doing in your job, does it ultimately translate into saving a life? And if it doesn't, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in it. If it doesn't translate ultimately into saving a life, to me, it's chafe. It's bureaucratic chafe. So yeah, partnerships. It's like a marriage, I suppose. Not that we're married.
Let me move away.
Thank you. So I wanted to pull on a couple threads that you've both brought up. Vivek, you talked about that long-term vision that's really necessary to accomplish good welfare and good conservation. And Azzedine, you talked about the world becoming a more difficult place and a more complicated place. And I think one of the places that we see that most is with habitat loss and fragmentation. And it's a very complicated situation, and it really does require that long-term view. And I think that's something that's being addressed by the Rite of Passage project. And Vivek, I hoped that you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, while individual lives matter a lot, eventually you have to have space for these lives to exist. India, I told you, has 1/3 of the world's poor. 1/3 of the world's poor, right? And 1.2 billion people and growing. So there is no space. I have 2 sons. If I leave something for them, it'll normally be some land or a house or something like that. Leaving money in the bank is of no use in a country like India. What you need is land. So if that's what one wishes for one's progeny, that's what you would want to wish for the constituency that you love, which is animals. Now, there is no space. You're trying to accommodate 65% of the world's tigers, about 80% of the Asian elephant, about 85% of the Asian rhino, and 100% of the Asian lion. I'm just giving you 4 examples of animals into this crowded landscape. So what you need is space for them to move. And as Mark Twain once said, when you see land, grab it, they ain't making it no more. Right. So I mean, the concept of putting aside land is fundamental. But unlike the room to roam theory of IFAW, which practice which I'm sure Azzedine will speak to, in Africa, in India we don't have the room to roam. We have room to wiggle. Yeah, but we need to wiggle to genetically link these populations through. So about 17 years ago to the date, we published a landmark book called Rite of Passage, which links the elephants. We used elephants as an example, but the same thing is applicable for tigers or anything else in that landscape, which connect our little fragmented protected areas. Remember that some of our big protected areas are 1,000 square kilometers. Kaziranga is a little over 1,000 square kilometers. Okay, when you're talking Savo or Hwange or these massive parks, you're talking 20,000, 16,000, 25,000 square kilometers. So these small little parks, we joined them together with corridors, not us creating corridors, but looking at elephant dung and looking at where elephants move. We created these corridors, and that became a landmark book, which has now seen 3 editions. And even today, even the Supreme Court of India refers to it, the government refers to it as the document which talks about corridors. The idea was to secure all these. Remember, about 50% of these were already secured. There was no problem with them. We just said that these are key, that it must be protected. They all fall outside protected areas. So they're linking protected areas. Some of them are linking a protected area to a non-protected area, which we need to get protected. Each of these are only a few kilometers in length and maybe a 1 kilometer, 1.5 kilometers in width. Basically, we said for elephant, it needs 500 meters to pass width. But if you give it 1 kilometer, it's fine. It'll link it genetically and they'll move, right? So small patches of land, not tens of thousands of acres like you need in Southern Africa, but linking a country which is the 6th largest country in the world, yeah, from top to bottom. So that is a concept, and we have shown through a number of projects now using different models of private purchase and giving back to government, private purchase and keeping it ourselves, community securement without any purchase, government purchase, but we act as a facilitator, and no purchase, no securement, but we just keep the corridors that are intact through campaigns and public events that raise people's empathy towards the elephant and allows it the right of passage. So not ownership, nothing, allow this animal to move. Remember, as I said, we have the ethical background, unlike Africa, for that. Yeah, generally, an Indian doesn't want to kill. Definitely does not want to eat wild meat in many of these areas, except very small tribal areas. So as a result, if you give the Indian an option of that animal surviving and not causing conflict, they'll take that. So that was the basic thing. It's been a long, big struggle, but now the government is recognizing things. They're putting in their own money and replicating stuff that we have shown as pilots. So it's a major achievement already. We still will do it for a few more years till we are sure that all of them are protected.
Yeah, our brand is animals and people thriving together in the place that we call home, and that's the planet. Why is it that we focus on that? The world today requires us to step outside this notion of what conservation was. You have a national park and it's set aside and you protect it and the animals live inside the park and the people are outside, and it really doesn't matter what they're up to or what their problems are. But the reality is in Africa, and what Vivek is talking about, the space, there's so much more space, and we've had some very interesting discussions where we brought Indian conservationists and government officials together with African officials on the issue of elephants, and they're talking about, well, I don't think that my colleagues from Kenya were saying, I don't think you understand. There's a village outside of the national park with 3,000 people in it, and we have to take into consideration their needs. And it's very difficult to convince that number of people. I don't think you understand. To which our Indian colleague said, well, actually, there's a village outside the national park with 3 million people. So the scales of what we're talking about is so extraordinary. And I think, we learn from one another and give examples. But room to roam is the same concept of being able to connect landscapes that are critical to the survival of not only elephants. We focus on elephants because if you can save elephants, you often are able to save many other species living in the same landscape. But the notion that you can just focus on biologists and scientists and ecologists and environmentalists, I think those days are gone. Yeah, we have to be educated on the investments that are being made on transportation, on energy, on climate change, health issues, all of those things that can disrupt the space that is needed if elephants and other wildlife are going to survive in a natural habitat. And so we focus on a massive, and it's a massive initiative to link, and we have the biology to show that it can be done. It was done historically with herds of elephants, all the way from Kenya down through to Zimbabwe. And I'll leave you with the notion that even in Africa, to the point that Vivek is making, that room to roam. Why? Because what we fight against is this strategy to say there are too many elephants. There are too many elephants and they must be killed or culled or sold. And it simply isn't true if elephants are allowed to roam. And there's all sorts of management issues with water and land use and all of those things. But the notion that there are too many elephants in Africa, historically and biologically, it's just not true. But it's a very powerful political argument.
So I don't know, Meredith, if you have time, I want to jump in again on this and give you a couple of things. I mean, one is this whole point of whether we call it rite of passage or room to roam or whatever. Ecologically, there are very strong foundations for this. This was in the 60s or something. Schumacher is a German ecologist who came up with the SLOSS theory, which is single large or several small. And the point that single large is brilliant in a concept, but no country can afford it. They have to put aside the sort of land that is required to protect wildlife in its true sense. And anyway, it's not a national thing, it's international. So it has to be several small or several large, but they have to be connected. Yeah, so that was the amendment to Schumacher's original theory, which is being practiced in what we are doing. So it's got a sound ecological base. Now, the point to what Azzedine was saying, I just came to Dubai now from Zimbabwe. And I was in Zimbabwe in '97 at CITES when Mugabe opened that conference, saying that every species must pay for itself or it dies. Okay, there were landmark papers there which said 1.6 elephants a square kilometer is a threshold for Zimbabwe, and if the elephants cross 1.6, then they're cowed. And there were good scientific papers. I'm not naming good scientific friends of mine who produced those papers. Now, I sat in the audience as Indian delegation, and mind you, this was put forward as a developing country point of view against white colonial imperialism of putting animals as natural history exhibits, while Africa needed to use it to survive. So I sat as an Indian delegation and said, this is not my point of view, so it can't be a developing country point of view. Maybe Africa's point of view, maybe Southern Africa's point of view, maybe Zim's point of view, but it's not mine, right? So I responded in 2 or 3 ways. I went back and actually put together a book called what the hell was the name of the book? Anyway, the Ethics of Nature Conservation in Asia was the subtitle, and in which I got leaders of Asia to say why they conserve wildlife. All right, which included the Dalai Lama, it included the Aga Khan, it included 3 presidents, it included several scientific and philosophers from Japan, China. I got from all over Asia. And none of them said that they want to save it because there was 1.6 elephants and there were so many humans. Yeah. In India, in our places where we say our successful elephant projects, there are 6 to 7 elephants a square kilometer. We call it God. We say Ganesh, right? It kills 400 Indians a year. In Africa, they don't kill anybody in most of these places where they are saying there's huge conflict. Or if they kill, there's an odd incident, right? So what is it? It can't be the numbers. It can't be that space. It is our attitudes and values and ethics that we place. And in a situation that we find, how we respond to it. So which is again something, whether it's rite of passage or room to roam, that I keep saying that IFAW also and WTI too must invest more in anthropologists and sociologists to understand the human mind and change in behavior more than ecologists. Because boy, we know our elephants. We need people to know people.
Thank you so much, Azzedine and Vivek. I think this is a great time to open it up for questions from you, our Global Council. So please. Well, I think while everyone thinks up their questions.
Oh, I think Joyce, did you unmute?
Well, I was just going to say one thing, and that is that thank you to both Azzedine and Vivek for this wonderful relationship that has gone on for so long. But it does speak to the primary need in this business that we're in to maintain good relationships, because that is where you can actually accomplish things. Formal entities oftentimes are not able to do that, but holding on to relationships and working them so that you accomplish things together is very powerful. And I think this is an example of how you can do it in the whole area of conservation with animals. So thank you both for maintaining that relationship. Miss seeing you, Vivek.
Thank you, Joyce.
And hello to Kathy out there too.
I know, I see she's on. But you know, it's a great point Joyce, and I think for us is it requires patience, and that's why I said perseverance, because the politics change and leaders change and presidents and prime ministers and ministers change, and sometimes it goes from a really great relationship to a philosophically opposed position, and so you have to have a strategy to wait it out and hope that the next election brings in someone who's going to come back. But that it gets to this issue of even expectations, and I know you're all incredible donors to us, of impact and wanting to see it in a time frame perhaps that is affected by politics, it's affected by biology, it's affected by natural disasters. So there's lots of things that interrupt the greatest laid plan.
I was just wondering, Vivek, you talked about all the NGOs that have been thrown out under the new government. Wonderful that WTI is still in favor. Have there been other major effects with this government on your broader agenda in terms how do they stand on conservation and wildlife?
Yeah, they have a middling record, let's put it this way, and this government may not necessarily understand the language of conservation as we speak it amongst ourselves, but which is why I told you conservation is the art of the possible. So you don't need to tell them room to roam or rite of passage. This government is very nationalistic and very strong on protecting India's nature, culture, right? So that's fine. We have rebranded it as natural heritage. So as long as you say this is what we're doing exactly the same things, but we use the word heritage, they are quite pro on that. So you have to find ways of talking to politicians, and they have not. To their credit, they are fast movers, swift movers. If they like it, they really support it, and they have supported us thus far.
I'm curious about the younger population. Are they becoming more interested in conservation? Is it about the same as it's always been? Where are the younger people in the movement?
That's very interesting. The younger people are much more aware than I was when I was growing up, or even the next generation, right? So awareness levels, in fact, I keep saying in India to WTI that I don't run awareness campaigns. We should not have anything called awareness. But the younger people are not as involved. So the challenge is to take that awareness and move it to participation and move it to involvement. In that, involvement takes dedication, time. These are not words that the new generation use. They neither have patience for a long-term relationship, nor do they want to get involved. They want to skim the surface and move. And in that, when they skim the surface, they find topics like conservation to be too weighty for them to probably grapple with. So they don't get involved. They move to the next thing, which is easier on their app. And I think it's just that. I don't think they're less aware. My boys are more aware.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday we did an event called Women in Conservation at the Women's Pavilion at Expo, and it was a great moment that we recognized 3 young Emirati women who are veterinarians right out of school, and they're going to have a 1-year internship at the rescue center in Assam. And they were absolutely flabbergasted that, one, we recognized them, and they got on the stage with the minister, and it was a very emotional moment for them. And I said to them, listen, your life will change when you get to Assam and you get to that rescue center. One, culturally, it's going to be very, very different. And what you might expect, that all of the things that you have in the UAE, you are going to be working on the ground. And they were thrilled, and I hope they will remain thrilled. But we do find, and we try to recognize and support in ways that we can the next generation. So in the region, I mean, it's not specific, but they're headed to India, and they're young Emirati women, which in itself is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I sit on a couple of boards which give international awards. I'd like to mention one, which is Future for Nature. It's meant for people under 35. And we get an extraordinary amount of good young people wanting to do work. So there are committed people. It's not that there aren't either.
Thank you.
We have one question in the comments, which is, what do you see as the greatest opportunity for IFAW and WTI in the next 1 to 3 years, or the greatest challenge?
You know, I'd say programmatically, and we were discussing this today, is that migratory species and animals, marine animals, that are in the region. So we were talking about the east coast of Africa, where we work, here in the Middle East, the Red Sea, the Gulf, and then the coast of India. The challenge, you know, sort of what we touched on is, I think nationalism can disrupt a much more international approach to what is absolutely critical. This notion of these are our whales or our turtles. We were talking about marine turtles. We were talking about sharks, dugongs. These are species that don't recognize borders. And so I think the world right now politically has made it more difficult to discuss some of these issues in the international fora like CITES and others that we have, because suddenly it's our elephants or our whales or our whale sharks, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I see it as an opportunity too, which I mean, like you said, a great opportunity. We do our work in IFAW in Asia and Africa. I think the great opportunity in the next few years is to bring our projects, align them together, and show that South-South learning and sharing that we can, and actually not make it just Zimbabwean projects or Indian projects or Chinese thing. If we can bring it together, we are the International Fund for Animal Welfare, so we must portray it like that. I think that's an opportunity.
And influencing, one of the things that Vivek has been extraordinarily helpful, and I know it'll continue to be, is, you know, we tried for about 20 years to become members of IUCN, so the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And the reason why it was so difficult for IFAW to become a member was because of our stance of individual animals have intrinsic value, and that was just rejected. And there were lots of other politics of it. But we're now members. Vivek is very influential inside IUCN. There's some opportunities that I hope that I can spend my time on. And we have a platform that is recognized as affecting decisions for nature and conservation across the world. And so that's a platform that we were talking today about. How is it that the two organizations and the two of us personally can use that platform to be a thought leader at a much larger scale? So that's what we'll focus on as well.
Yeah, sure. That's beyond WTI or the partnership. I am in certain positions in the IUCN and the Society for Conservation Biology and stuff like that, where I can definitely bring in IFAW concepts. Already doing it, I don't want to get into detail, but position this thought process of ours as not just a loony idea, but based on science. And yeah, sorry, I think we have other questions.
Yeah, Ian, you have your hand up, and this unfortunately will have to be the last question.
Okay, sure. So thank you. So thank you for the great overview of the partnership. Really nice to hear about all the initiatives over the years. you commented on stressors in the system and challenges that are occurring, and I'm just curious about the impact of climate change on wildlife in the Indian subcontinent. I'm imagining with the extremely high density of the population that the chances for conflict between wildlife and humans and the diverse groups needing similar resources could be even more intense than elsewhere. And I'm just curious if you have any insights there you can share.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think climate change is going to be one of the straw that breaks all our backs, including the camels. Water is going to be the single largest problem for India's humans, India's wildlife. Already is stressing out large number of people with droughts frequently increasing, our glaciers receding. So we can see effects on humans. It's difficult to relate this to animals till it's almost too late. If you work on elephants alone or tigers, as we do, and especially in most of our partnerships. But the good thing about this partnership is WTI can do other things outside IFAW's room to roam. So I have started in the last 3 years amphibians. So I need something which is tangible in climate change to try and make that link, to convince politicians, right? And amphibians have a short lifespan, they're critically endangered. There are 100 critically endangered amphibians in India, and that's something one can look at. So one has to make that link. It is definitely going to affect elephants, it's going to affect humanity. And we just need to talk to politicians more about it.
Thanks.
All right, well, I want to thank you all for sharing time with us today, and I'm going to hand it back over to Mark.
Thank you, Meredith. And thanks, Vivek. And thank you, Azzedine, for a really enlightening presentation. Here I am, Vivek, offering people to come and visit you in India to see Kaziranga or Manas. I know that you will, welcome them if they show up. I for one, really want to come and see that Tiger Rescue Center. But I think that the work that these two organizations have done is truly inspiring, for sure. The work that you have done in India is extremely impactful and extremely impressive. The facilitation of IUCN as well, and having you as involved in that has been immensely helpful to us at IFAW as well. And this is really, really great work. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you both for being there in Dubai. I don't even know what time it is. What is it? 8 or 10 hours ahead?
It's 8 o'clock at night, yeah.
8 o'clock at night. So it's time for you to have your dinner or whatever. But
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thanks for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. And peace to you and peace to all. Thank you.